Hi, it's 5th of April at 10 o'clock here in Sweden, Thursday, and you see here on the BBC's homepage, you see the memory hole in full effect and force, and on the front page here we have a Moscow's dirty secret, a thing about Putin doesn't recycle his rubbish, so shame on those dirty Russians. And let's see in the world here now, Lula, non-corruption charges, will be sent to prison. It's kind of part of the ongoing neoliberalisation of Brazilian politics again. They kind of lost control down there for a while. Lula is being hung out to dry at the moment. Anyway, as part of the war narrative, 8 hours ago this appeared in the UK section of the news. North Korean missile could reach UK shores within months. Echoes of weapons of mass destruction. Before that, even the Iraqi super gun, for anyone that's old enough to remember the Iraqi super gun, and the whistleblower Clive Pontin and all of that. What we have here is the military-industrial complex in full cry, lining up their casus belli for launching an assault on Iran, which is the last of the countries mentioned by the famous video on Democracy Today, where the former head of US forces in Europe and NATO, forget the guy's name now, Wesley Walker, wasn't it? Yeah, General Wesley Walker. Now, putting the Skripal narratives, the Brexit narrative, weapons of mass destruction, really in a line all the way back to even the Falklands War. You see the military-industrial complex driving policy across the West Washington Consensus, and the subtext to all of these narratives are othering some evil force outside of the in-group, which is the populations within the so-called liberal democracies. And if you're new to geopolitics, and if you're new to analysing anything other than the superficial narratives that appear on things like the BBC website, if you're not used to trawling through perhaps some of the more in detail technical reports that are made available to governments, not just on geopolitical issues, even domestic issues, the narratives are almost a new form of esoteric writing, and if they are read literally, you are likely to be missing the real underlying vibe or mood that the propagandists are trying to engender. So I keep coming back to the idea of the grey space and Duchamp, which relates to art, and how a picture requires the person watching it to actually complete what the picture means, because it means something different to each of the people. Now, when we have interviews with people on the BBC saying, "Oh, you should trust your government, you should trust your security forces and whatnot." That's harking back to almost old prejudices against modern art. I mean, they crop up from time to time. I mean, some people just prefer figurative art to abstract art. I mean, that's in the somewhat same way that some people prefer Mozart to Wagner, or prefer the Spice Girls to the Cheeky Girls, or I mean, I don't know any modern pop groups, so I couldn't really say what the current equivalent would be between, say, the rivalry between Oasis and Damon Albarn's band, whatever they were called. So this black and white sort of narrative of, them and us, divide and rule, these themes come out a lot in the main pillars of the current narrative, which is they hate us for our freedoms because we're democracies, and we're liberal democracies at that, and we're tolerant. That's one of them. Spreading democracy. John Lennon once famously said that fighting for peace is akin to fucking for virginity, and that's quite a crude way of putting it, but these narratives often are contradictory, and the more you scratch the surface, the more you reveal something that is not as it seemed. So the packaging is an overblown representation of what is in the box, as it were. So North Korea, this is this thing on the screen here. We've seen this all before, and surely it's a good thing if Donald Trump does meet with this guy Kim Jong-un, and they all decide to, call off the hostilities that have been going on there since 1954. I mean, North Korea, South Korea, people are old enough like me will remember the famous television series MASH, which was set in the Korean War, I mean, it's quite telling that in the whole sweep of history since the Second World War, there really have been a constant chain of wars. For a war that was supposed to end all wars, or was that the First World War, we seem to have been doing a pretty good job of beating 7 shades of shit out of each other since. So very, very, it's basically a false narrative. And so when the EU says that Brexit is so terrible because the EU was formed to stop future wars, well, the EU is part of the NATO and the general military-industrial complex drive towards colonial, imperial, resource-based wars, and preserving the hegemony of the Washington Consensus and the oligarchy of the Washington Consensus. So it's hard to get into these things without ending up making a very long, winding spiels or whatever, so all diatribes, rants, but I'll try and keep this pretty brief. So there's Kim Jong-un, who apparently can shoot his missiles, Rocket Man, as Donald Trump calls him, to the UK, and he'll be in that position to do that within months. Oh my God, quick, build the bomb shelter. So keep that on one side, and then let's go into Skripal. Ben Wallace, this guy here, is the UK Security Minister. and the unfortunate Mr. Wallace has been wheeled out instead of Boris Johnson. Boris has egg on his face from his Die Welt German TV interview, in which he quite uncategorically said something about what Porton Down thought, which Porton Down's Mr. Aikenhead flatly contradicted. So they both can't be right, and Boris has clearly run for cover. And so the charming and I'm sure very amusing company MP, this guy Ben Wallace, has been doing the rounds. I'd made a video of an appearance he made on the regular BBC. This is Radio 5 Live, and so good. This is a very good interview. But let's just have a listen of what he has to say.
Boris Johnson spoke to somebody who says they had absolutely no doubt, and then the head person at Porton Down comes out yesterday and says actually we can't definitively say.
Well, look, you asked me to comment on it. I mean, what I heard was he said no doubt. I mean, there is no doubt that this is Novichok.
No,
absolutely.
No. But is
and
it
there is
made
no
by the
doubt
Russian
that
state?
it is a certain strain of Novichok, which is held by very, very, very few countries. And there is no doubt from the other intelligence I see and some of the leads and the track record of Putin, who said traitors must kick the bucket, target they selected, a man they alleged to be a former traitor and a spy, and their track record of Litvinenko, and their track record of blocking investigations. So, they have tried. That I have no doubt that, what that person was probably saying to Boris Johnson is we have no doubt it's Russia. It is a year today since the Syrian regime used gas on its own people. What happened when the world at the UN Security Council said we'd like to investigate this? One country blocked that, and that was Russia. They don't do investigations. What we do know is they do assassinations.
They have, however, asked for a joint investigation with you into what's happened to the Skripals. If you've got nothing to hide in the interest of transparency, why not say yes?
I think that would be a bit like asking Al Capone to verify his own tax return. Look, we have international experts. I trust the British police. I trust the British intelligence services. I go and visit them a lot. They are incredibly capable people from all sorts of backgrounds, and political backgrounds, and everything else, and they are professionals.
Right, well, Mr. Wallace, some of us don't share your touching trust and credulity for the British security forces, and particularly their talking heads such as yourself. Indeed, incredulity is the natural response. Now, let's take the claim that he makes in the middle of that video about the claim of poison gas use in Syria on the 4th of April last year. He's referring to this here. This is the BBC's coverage of that event. Syrical chemical attack, what we know, 26th of April 2017. This is the Khan Sheikhoun attack on the 4th of April. Now, he refers to the United Nations Security Council and Russia blocking an investigation. There was an investigation, and the investigation was actually carried out by the OPCW. The OPCW has, which is the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, has a joint investigative mechanism which was set up for investigating these sorts of claims in Syria, and more particularly a fact-finding mission in Syria on reported, and I've got a copy of the report open on my screen here, 2017 here. Right, so the OPCW declared on 19th of April that lab results indicate that the victims were exposed to sarin or a sarin-like substance. Now that's absolutely fine, no one disagrees with that at all. The OPCW here, they have a website, and 4th of April they have their hearing, then they send off their fact-finding mission. Here are a bunch of reports from other fact-finding missions. This one here, S1510 2017, refers to Khan Shakun, which is on my screen here. Here we are, S1510 2017, all downloadable, and you can read the full report. And joint mission to Syria. There's a Wikipedia article. Now, I read that report some time ago, and when I saw Ben Wallace's interview, the thing that I immediately thought was this paragraph here at 2.5 regarding the scope of the mission, and it reads, "The scope of the fact-finding mission's mandate does not include the task of attributing responsibility for the alleged use." And then that's a noted one, and then the footnote is the 5th perambular paragraph of ECM 48 DC1, 6th perambular paragraph, blah blah blah, United Nations Security Council Resolution 2235 2015. Now, Ben Wallace is, I'm sure, aware of all of this, but his job as a propagandist for the industrial military complex is not to shine light on these matters, it's to shine light in completely the wrong direction. Now, so I've put links in this blog here to those two reports, and then this is the final paragraph, which, indeed, sarin was used. Now, moving on from that, I did a blog some time ago called Cui Bono, which is, who benefits, regarding Boris Johnson's debut performance at the United Nations General Assembly, and he talks about white phosphorus and all these terrible things happening in Syria, and how they're all the fault of Bashar al-Assad, and what a wicked man he surely is. And I don't, that may well or may not be true. I mean, he certainly scrubs up well and, does a good interview, as does Vladimir Putin, but as does Ben Wallace, as does Boris himself. I mean, they're all very good talking heads, and they all have a certain sort of curbside appeal for people hunting for political prostitutes. That's why they're selected to do the job that they do. They get the punters in the door and their crosses in the box, and claim their democratic mandates accordingly. But, here's the but. They make these claims and then they don't back them up with facts. And Skripal and the Salisbury incident has seen all of the putting the cart before the horseness, all of the declaring guilt before people have a chance to make any defence against their accusations. We're back to, basically back ducking stools and witch trials. Now, if you swallowed whole your textbooks at school, I studied modern history, and our textbook was, just the standard narratives about the Second World War and the First World War and all the rest of it, and they don't really get you home to any understanding about what those two wars were about. If you care to look at the last few blogs that I've done and follow some of the links, you'll find that there are lots of reasons to question, lots of commonplace views, commonly held notions that people don't feel any evidence is required to make those claims, and certainty is certainly no badge of learning. I think the more you read, the more you doubt. You know, the more you study, the better questions you have. So anyway, Ben Wallace, there it is. Make up your own mind. Have a look at the OPCW report, and take a look at other things that you perhaps felt, well, that doesn't seem quite right, but decided not to follow it up. I mean, we all have particular things that affect us particularly. You know, think of things that particularly affected you, which you thought at the time, well, oh well, you know, perhaps it's only me, and I'll, you know, just get on with things. That's the way it is. You may well find that that isn't just the way it is, or just the way it needs to be. I mean, a big lie of our time at the moment, which Mrs. May and her people are trying to steer away from, was austerity necessary? Well, the answer to that is no, austerity wasn't necessary. It was a political choice, and the same thing applies to much policy, particularly policy based upon ideas of, well, have we got enough money? The better question about whether or not something can be done is, are there enough resources, and if those resources could be applied better elsewhere, what should we choose to use those resources for if we have to choose? And that is bound up in the question that used to be put this way, and the famous historian, A.J.P. Taylor, said that it's a question of guns or butter. You can have guns or butter. I mean, as a resource example, that's not actually very good. The better one is the more ancient one, which is swords or ploughshares, where they're actually made out of the same material. Perhaps they should make guns out of butter. It would, you know, it would certainly be more fun, sort of smearing each other in butter than firing bullets at one another, I'm sure. So there we are. Make of it what you will. That's all I've got to say on Mr. Ben Wallace, MP.